The last writer's strike in 2007 lasted 100 days and cost California more than $2 billion.
Speaking of people who don't like to base things on merit, I want to turn our attention to a current fight going down in Hollywood with the Writers Guild of America, which is one of the many unions that controls the entertainment industry. And they currently have gone on strike as of the past week. Let's roll this clip.
A writer's strike appears to be written in the stars as a midnight deadline fast approaches for the WGA to reach a new deal with Hollywood studios. Entertainment Tonight co-host Kevin Frazier reports more than 11,000 writers of your favorite films and TV shows could walk off the job and onto the picket line as soon as tomorrow.
It is a true Hollywood cliffhanger.
Action!
And the ending is still being written.
Incredibly grateful that there are negotiators for both sides. Incredibly hopeful that they can come to an agreement.
The first impact would be late-night TV. All these shows could be off by tomorrow, plus the remaining episodes of Saturday Night Live. This week's scheduled host is Pete Davidson.
As you know, the writer's strike might happen.
Oh, that's right.
So I've been working on this for like 2-3 months, and they're like, yeah, well, we'll know Monday.
More than 11,000 writers are set to walk the picket line if no deal is reached with Hollywood producers. The main issue is streaming. 78% of households now subscribe to at least one streaming service, but the writers say those series pay less and have fewer episodes. 10 years ago, the WGA says a third of its TV writers worked at the minimum salary. It's now half. But studio producers say their budgets are already stretched, and they can't make a profit by paying more when revenues are falling. Also playing a role in the labor talks? AI. The writers want assurances that studios won't use artificial intelligence like ChatGPT to generate new scripts. The last writer's strike in 2007 lasted 100 days and cost California more than $2 billion. Back then, Stephen Colbert was on Comedy Central.
Where are my words?
We have no script, Stephen.
Why not?
The writers are on strike.
Now, a long strike could push back the fall TV season, and even if there is an agreement, consider that next month, contracts expire for the unions representing both Hollywood's directors and actors. Nora?
Kevin Frazier, thank you.
So, Hannah, I don't know what I'm going to do without all the witty and entertaining and clever content on today's late night shows. I just tune into them every night, and now there's going to be a huge void in my life without this.
Right. And also, who is going to rewrite Disney movies and make them live action? I mean, this is kind of funny to me because I have been annoyed at Hollywood for some time, but not for the usual like right-wing conservative reasons. I just think the quality of content gets worse and worse. If you go back to how movies were made when I was even a young adult, you had all kinds of genres. You had a lot of indie films, just really artistic stuff being done. And now it's like everything is just a Disney remake or a Spider-Man, comic figure movie. It just feels like there's been a lack of creativity out of Hollywood in recent years, and it's been quite boring to me. TV's been a little bit better, but yeah, my first reaction was a little bit smug like you, like, oh, okay, bye. I think there's so many independent content creators that are just making so much more interesting content on places like YouTube or TikTok even. That's what I turn on and watch. I'm not really watching most of these programmed shows anyways, but maybe that's just me. But I thought that this case was fascinating. I wanted to talk about it for a number of reasons. One, I just think probably a lot of people aren't even aware this is going on. And given my background in the music industry, I am very aware of how unions have played a major role in ruining entertainment. And I want to dig into this a little bit. So first, though, just so we're on the same page, I have this chart that will flash on screen if you're watching, but I pulled up what these people are actually getting paid right now. So they are, once again, in a union. Almost any entity operating within the theater world, the music industry world, Hollywood, you almost have to be in a union. Like they've made it virtually impossible to not participate. And once you're in, they are in charge of negotiating on your behalf. They set minimum salaries. They report on maximum salaries. Sometimes they participate in salary caps. You as an individual no longer really have total bargaining power on your own, right? You're now being bargained for as a member of the collective, which I have problems with in and of itself. But if you look at this chart, it's showing where the median pay is right now for writers, and this is on a 1-hour episode. It says the median pay for that, if you have a co-producer title, is $16,500 per episode, with the maximum reported around $39,000, and then it moves through like various kind of levels of experience you could have. If you're a showrunner, it would be $52,500 per episode. I don't really feel like these people are being drastically underpaid.
Well,
and they even note
let
here,
me-
they say, well, real quick, they say, while rates have generally increased over the past 2 years, these episodic queues remain too low relative to historical pay and the value of the content writers create with the increasing prevalence of the seasons and mini rooms. So a lot of this stems down to the fact that the structure of how TV is being produced, it's mostly changed because now we're in a streaming model versus a broadcast television model. That means you have shorter seasons, you have fewer episodes per season. And so your ability to have long-term work as a writer has certainly changed, but that also means that you're not making as much over a period of time. So you had 20 episodes in a show and you were contracted to it, you're going to make a lot more money than now if you have 6
right,
episodes.
but they're still not exactly deprived, because down when we scroll down and we look at this other chart they have, they're saying, well, we have high episodic rates, but it's not as much because the streaming series are shorter and there's fewer episodes. However, when they average it out and they come up with a weekly compensation rate, median weekly rate for a co-producer is just $7,731 per week. Hannah, these people are struggling to get by. They can't feed their families. They're just out in the streets protesting for a basic living wage.
That's right. 11,000 of them just barely scraping by in Hollywood. I mean, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy here. You as a whole are paid very, very well once you are employed in these kinds of industries. And I want to break down sort of some of the reasons they might not be paid even better than they are. And I think overall the issues I have with what they're demanding right now under this strike. And I think it's important to look at because while this just affects people in Hollywood, this is the kind of behavior that you often see with labor unions in any sector across the country. And it's why so many people are completely opting out of them, as you increasingly have the ability to do that in most states across the country. Now, California is not one of them. It is not a right to work state. It is a heavily unionized state. And Hollywood has been a union town since about the 1930s, where you saw sort of the end of the silent film era and what they called talkies, so movies that had speaking in them. And that's when you saw talent guilds, including the Writers Guild of America, SAG, AFTRA, which are the ones for actors, the Director Guilders Union. They were formed. And so they've basically been taken over since that point in time. And again, this is also true, everything I'm about to say, this is also true in the music industry. It's also true on Broadway. Pretty much any sector you want to break into in entertainment requires being unionized. And that's one reason that it's so hard to break in if you are talent, because unions are only successful at keeping pay high by keeping competition out. And you, as somebody who wants to work in the field, are competition. And so that is how they, in any way, keep prices artificially high. It's not really that they have this magic bullet. It's just that they're exclusionary and make it really hard for the vast majority of people to work in industries that they want to work in. As somebody who used to be trying to break into one of those industries, I found it incredibly frustrating. Often productions, they won't hire you if you're not union, but you have to be in a union production to become a union member. So it's this catch-22. And then once you,
that doesn't make sense.
it's ridiculous. But in order to be in a union, you have to get hired to work on a union production. You can always audition, but they are more likely to hire their own members, right? Because this is about keeping competition out. So you basically have to get lucky enough, be good enough that you outpace somebody who's already in the union and you get a union production to hire you. And then at that point, you can apply for union membership. But there's another catch-22. If you are accepted, you then are never allowed to work on non-union productions again. So let's say you are a writer and you want to be a Hollywood writer and you finally get to work on a production that's unionized. You get unionized, but now you're not allowed to take money or jobs that aren't unionized. So it, again, makes it really, really hard to get work. And it's something that people often struggle with of like, do I join the union or do I not? Because it kind of boxes you out of a good number of jobs either way that you go. Yeah, so it's corrupt, right? I mean, I would hate that if our industry functioned this way.
Yeah, I would absolutely hate that. The idea that the unions, they're not serving your individual best interests, right? They're serving this nebulous collective and their own officials' interests, and Also, for the average worker, well, if you're not average, that's not going to be you.
Right. Well, I would always say unions are a really good idea if you suck at your job. And I'm not trying to be mean. I mean, honestly, if you are an average or below average worker, average or below average talent, unions are great for you because you're going to get brought up by the people who are really, really good. But if you're really, really good at your job, if you're a smart person, if you're a hard worker, a union is the worst deal for you because it basically pulls you down to the average amongst you and prevents you from being able to negotiate on your own behalf. Not only that, but these unions operate like such mafia thugs that if you're not union right now, they send out emails to people on this, there's this service called Backdoor that is where a lot of independent screenwriters upload their stuff trying to get discovered and often sell screenplays that way and break into it. They send out an email to all membership on there saying if you're not union and you try to sell a script right now during the strike and undermine the strike in doing so, you'll be blacklisted from ever working a union job. So it's not even that they just like prevent competition. It's not even that like for their own members that you're kind of stifled by their negotiations. They literally threaten you and say that if you try to work when they don't want their people to work, that they'll blacklist you from working.
Oh, that's very, very normal behavior.
Yeah, totally fine. But yeah, I mean, as a whole, they are there to negotiate for the collective. I don't think at an individual level it's very helpful. And I want to break down again the problems that they have with their pay scale. I think are really interesting and actually indicative of how unions stagnate progress. Because if you had a free market and TV and movies started moving towards streaming, writers on an individual level would be able to start negotiating pay on different scales, right? Instead of having to work on the old model. But because studios and production companies have to pay writers based on the formula that the Writers Guild of America puts out there, they're still getting paid in old ways, which would be you basically get hired to write a script and then maybe you get some residual income from it. Residual income would come like when you see a TV show go into syndication. So back in the day, Friends was a huge show. Those writers got paid a lot of money to write every episode for Friends. And then once Friends went off the air, it got picked up in syndication on TBS. So every time they aired an episode of the Friends show, those writers would get paid what's called a residual pay. And so you ended up making a lot more money over the lifetime of a show because of that. That's not really what we're seeing in streaming these days. Streaming, you have more of an initial burst and then a show sort of dissipates. So it has really changed how they get paid. But I don't think that would be such a big problem if unions hadn't baked in the old model and way of doing things. So I'm going to read you what they're basically asking for. They're explicitly trying to make freelance writing impossible right now. They want you to basically still get paid how you would have been paid when broadcast TV reigned, where you are locked in for a full season, 30 episodes, you have week in, week out guaranteed pay. They want it to go back to that, even though that's not the model anymore. It's like the book, Who Moved My Cheese? And instead of figuring out new ways of doing things, new ways to price things, they're just trying to insist that they can turn back the hands of time and pretend it's 20 years ago. So they said in their announcement, though we negotiated intent on making a fair deal and through your strike vote gave us the leverage to make some gains, the studio's responses to our proposals have been wholly insufficient given the existential crisis writers are facing. The company's behavior has created a gig economy inside a union workforce, and their immovable stance in this negotiation has betrayed a commitment to further devaluing the profession of writing. From their refusal to guarantee any level of weekly employment in episodic television, to the creation of a day rate and comedy variety, to their stonewalling on free work for screenwriters and on AI for all writers, they have closed the door on their labor force and opened the door to writing as an entirely freelance profession. Oh no. No such deal could ever be contemplated by this membership. And this is typical. Unions hate gig work. They hate
like a gig economy. The horror.
And I'm like, even as a writer, a gig economy, freelance writing means you have the opportunity to write on a lot more shows. There's a lot more shows being produced nowadays thanks to streaming. I think the New York Times reported that back, 20 years ago, you had something like 200 to 300 shows in production at a given time, and now it's well over 500 at a given time. So yes, you are not guaranteed to write on a show for as long, but there's a lot more being done and you can take on more work. Freelancing would actually be a great opportunity for a lot of writers. I know I love working as a freelancer, but you often hear unions trying to convince everybody that gig work is so abusive and harmful. And no, it actually just hurts you as a union because then you can't force people to pay dues to you. It's kind of a death knell for unions because once people become independent and realize that they can negotiate better for themselves and structure their own work weeks as they want, they actually have a lot more bargaining power under that kind of structure than they do within a union. So it's really not a threat to writers. It's a threat to the union themselves. But they always try to spin it that way and act like they're just, your big protector coming in. One other thing I'll note, the WGA is also asking for mandatory minimum staffing requirements for episodic television and demanding a guaranteed number of consecutive weeks for work of writers. They claim the staffing and length of employment demands were the primary sticking points in their negotiations. So this is akin to a union coming in and saying, we need to demand a 5-day, 8-hour work week. Nobody wants that anymore. We don't need that anymore. We can move forward into new ways of doing things and figure out how you should structure agreements. I mean, maybe writers should structure their agreements where you get more on the front end since residuals are going down under the new model. There's ways that you could approach this, but instead they're always thinking of things in a very anti-tech way, right? Instead of thinking, how can ChatGPT improve our craft, improve our processes? How can we integrate it and make ourselves more productive? They're saying ban technology, ban new tech, make sure that we have the old way of doing things guaranteed. And it's just a recipe for disaster. It slows down not only the individual's economic progress, but I think industries as a whole, right? You don't see them innovate as quickly as you would otherwise.
I mean, think about it. Before the introduction of the automobile would have been vigorously opposed by the union. I don't know if there was one, but if there was, for horse buggy drivers, right?
Yeah.
It would have been an existential threat to their livelihood. But all of society is better off because of the vastly increased productivity and economic growth and everything from transitioning from horse-drawn carriages to automobiles. So they're always going to have a very narrow set of interests. They're also essentially arguing there for mandated inefficiency when they say like mandatory minimum staffing requirements for episodic television. Well, they're saying we're demanding that you hire more writers than you actually need to produce a show, because the producers are going to hire as many writers as they need without this mandatory minimum. If they can have fewer, they will, because they don't need them. So you're essentially demanding inefficiency be ingrained into the system in the name of preserving an archaic system around certain special interests who benefit from the status quo. And that's unfortunately kind of what we often see from unions who have enough market share to do this kind of coercive bargaining. And it's always interesting to me because progressives hate monopolies on the business side, right? If there's a one, and they have, those don't occur very often in a free market. But when they do occur, it is true that they can be bad for customers and bad for workers if they have a monopoly. But a successful union where you're able to crush all scabs is essentially a monopsony, which is the inverse of a monopoly. It's just a monopoly on the supply side of labor. So, but that's what they want, and they don't see an inconsistency there at all.
No, and what's interesting, if you look back at the history of strikes within these unions, they often do come about at the turn of new technology. And so this is something that you've seen in 2007 when streaming was first starting to come around. You saw it back in the 80s when broadcast TV was changing its formulation. It's kind of just interesting to me that, again, they always are just trying to fight progress, fight innovation, fight the hands of time. And it's quite silly because really things are getting better for workers. Innovation is good for workers. Conditions can improve rapidly, but you are trying to prevent that because you can't imagine another way of doing things. And I think it's just really not good for us as a society to have this kind of mentality. As they mentioned in that video, the last time the writers went on strike, it cost the city of LA about $2.1 billion. And that's because there's a lot of other industry that depends on the industry of Hollywood, right? You have car services, you have costume designers, you have pet trainers. You have all kinds of people who make their living based on the production of these TV shows and movies. And so when you have a strike happen, it can be pretty significant for many people who, had nothing to do with it and are punished anyways because of these actions. And as they mentioned, both the directors and actors unions, their contracts are about to expire as well. And so they think that there actually could be 3 unions on strike in the very near future, which who even knows what kind of economic impact that would make. But I think as a whole, the point of striking is supposed to be to get public sympathy for what you're going through. And I just don't think they're going to get it. A lot of these streaming companies, they're trying to paint them as these like greedy, multi-billion-dollar companies. A lot of them have been losing money. Similar to Uber and Lyft, they had a lot of angel investors who were interested in seeing them get off the ground and basically subsidized them for some time. But we're seeing a lot of cutbacks. Disney's been laying people off. Warner Brothers just announced a bunch of layoffs. Netflix has been really pulling in their purse strings. A lot of them have not been profitable yet. And the amount of money that they are spending on these productions is flabbergasting. We're talking billions of dollars a year. So I don't really think this is actually a situation where the streaming companies are just being super greedy. I think it's very similar to what we saw happen when I was in the music industry, where the way people engage with content and how they pay for content simply changed with technology. And it actually opened up the opportunity for a lot more people to make a lot more money off of entertainment. People like you and I can make a good bit of money simply by sitting here and recording a podcast or recording a YouTube video and making advertising dollars on it. Instead of recognizing that and just capitalizing on it, they continue to want to go back to the way things were done. So in music, they kept trying to push album sales. Why are they still making albums? Could not tell you. The amount it takes to make an album is crazy, and people listen to singles on streaming platforms. But instead of figuring that out and figuring out how do we cut costs over here and better monetize these new models, they're still fighting that in music too. And I promise you, I've seen this play out. It's not good for anybody involved. And what ends up happening is that you have a lot of money that you're spending trying to force an old way of doing things, and your profits continue to go down. It creates a very unstable industry. I know when I was working in music, companies were folding left and right. They get sold overnight. I mean, it was just kind of a mad grab trying to figure out how you could still sustain the old model instead of just simply evolving and figuring out a new way of doing business. And the smart people, they just opt out, right? They just become independent singers. They become independent content creators. And I have a hunch that's what's going to continue to happen, is you're going to see more and more people just turn to places like YouTube. And I think that's probably great for the consumer. It's great for the individual content creator. And the people that are going to get screwed over in this whole process are people who continue to join unions and ascribe to this very anti-competitive, anti-capitalist model way of doing things.